Thank you. Dzień dobry. Good morning. Hopefully everybody recovered from the fun party last night. I had to leave a little bit early just to make sure I was up on time. And so it's good to be here in Krakow again. And I want to talk about delivering fast with confidence. So I want to start off by thinking, when a lot of people, how are we developing today? And there's a lot of people developing a lot of different ways. A lot of people do what the so-called agile way of developing, whatever that means. And different people have different ways of doing the agile. It could be, what practice are we using? But there's a lot of things about it, agile, there's a lot of hope with agile, and some of that focuses around accelerating our delivery, keeping our focus on what the customer needs are, what are the important values. And obviously we want to get the velocity up. Let's accelerate our delivery, get the burn down, there, and make things visible so that we can get that feedback. And the main thing with the Agile Manifesto was really developed on working software. And so we're really focusing on a lot of features. And one of the issues you have is when you're really focusing on features as you're going along, certain architectural qualities they're not quite so visible. We're trying to do the right thing and focus quickly on what we're developing, but technical debt can kind of start to become an issue, especially when the spotlight is really focused on the features, which provide the business value. So our product owners are all, okay, we're putting things on the backlog based upon these features as we go through, and how do we keep these things visible? And we do a good job of making these features visible and having the teams prioritize this. But as we're going along, we're focusing on these features, and it could be, we're developing our solution. We're trying to figure out what our new products are. Maybe we need an eBiz or some mobile version, and we're going along. But ultimately, what we have is, as we're developing a solution, things start really growing, and we're being successful. But what is this solution? What's going on? What's under the hood? What's below the waterline? Things can get very complicated as you go along. So what really is going on below the waterline? We have all these different types of things to keep these systems live and going. We're focusing on reliability, scalability, sometimes these little ilities or orthogonal, usability versus security. I mean, if we want something very usable, let's not worry about security as much. But, if we're eBiz and we're taking credit cards, we need to be concerned about security. So a lot of times developing good practical solutions is balancing these forces that are kind of fighting us. And then ultimately we want it to be able to maintain it and continue going. So it could be we're sailing along at a really nice speed. Things seem to be going okay. We've got all the features going in the right direction, but lo and behold, all of a sudden we have some problems. We can no longer sustain, our velocity. We're still doing a lot of tasks, but it's getting much harder to release these things and reliable. It's getting to the point where we're making changes, but we're having to also fight a lot of bugs, and we're having to get more team members to develop and deal with these types of issues. So how can we deal with these types of problems as we go, and how can we resolve this? Now, a lot that leads to this is some code rot, and code rot can happen over time as we're developing our systems in Java or whatever our favorite language is. Ultimately, if we just blindly keep going on to features, we can start getting up to some problems. Especially, we start letting some dirt or mess accumulate because we're so worried about getting these features out for the next release and keeping our velocity up, and we're not given the time to go back and clean things up as we go. This can really start leading to some problems. And in fact, if this starts becoming part of the team mindset, then I'm a new developer coming to your team, I can be caught up with that. I mean, neglect can be contagious. So in other words, this has even been proven in neighborhoods. If your neighborhood, if I don't mow my lawn and I let my yard go to hell, so to speak, and I'm not taking care of what's going on and the neighbors are doing that, it can be contagious. Fortunately, the other side is contagious as well. If all of a sudden I start cleaning up my yard, mowing my yard regularly and don't letting a mess happen, that can also be contagious. But if I come into your team And the new way, the way everybody adds new features is just to hack in, add more to a method, and then I have now hundreds or thousands of lines, and add a new case statement and add a new parameter. This is going to cause a lot of problems, and ultimately it can catch up with us. In fact, some of this dirt can become very hard to clean if you don't clean it right away, and lead to a lot of technical debt issues that can slow things down. And ultimately, you end up with a big ball of mud, which is what I'm best known for, because being one of the co-authors of the Big Ball of Mud about 12 years ago, no, actually it's 18 years ago, a long time ago. But yet it was just mentioned in the Financial Times last week. The big ball of mud is a lot of this technical debt can lead, and if you don't address it, it can really cause a lot of problems as you go along. So how can we deal with that? Now, a lot depends on what you value, and your values drive your practice. The team values, the organization values, how we want to go, and how we evolve. So, you know, remember I had this picture early on, and it was focusing on some values. It focused on certain values of simplicity or unity, transparency. Let's not hide anything. Let's make sure that the customer knows where we're at, and we understand the customer. And we're trying to make things visible. We show the customer where we're at as we're going. And we're trying to get a lot of tests and try to really validate that what we're building is correct. But I think there's a lot of hidden values in here that this doesn't talk about. You have things, working software is important. That's one of the big principles of the Agile manifesto, is focusing on working software over just documentation. Not that we're against documentation, it's valuable, but documents don't run. We got to build something that works. So let's make that one of our higher values. But there's some other quality values that are hidden in here, like the quality software, customer satisfaction. That's kind of hidden in there in that what we have. You know, and we're continually trying to get feedback as we're evolving, but also we have to sustain it. So we can do a lot of organizations when they go agile. I'm a consultant and I go out and work with a lot of organizations around the world. And a lot of times when I come in, usually the reason I'm coming in is they have problems. You know, if things were going great, they wouldn't be having me come in. But when I come in into these organizations, Agile was really good, and it was like drinking the Kool-Aid. It was really good for a while, but then they started having trouble sustaining it, and because they were blindly following some so-called Agile practices. Maybe it was Scrum or TDD or extreme programming, but ultimately we have to have the reliability, and we got to maintain this and have a good positive team and keep that team and grow that team as we go. And so there's some visible things that we can do to look at that, and so I want to talk about that some, because your values drive your practice. If I don't value clean code, if I don't value quick deliveries, I'm not going to do it. So we have to look at that. Now, a lot of Agile Lean, there's many practices out there, but a lot of them talk about keeping the design as simple as possible. We want to inspect and adapt, get that quick feedback as we go, small frequent releases so we can get that feedback, but really focusing on learning and lots of validation through testing to are we meeting the customer's needs. But there's some other things in here, like we continually want to improve, and we want to build quality software as well. Otherwise, we cannot sustain this as we go. And so there's many Agile practices out there that supposedly try to meet this. Many people are doing Scrum. That's probably the most popular one that you have out there. And most Scrum teams that I've worked with have about 2-week sprints, sometimes 1 week, sometimes 3. Worst case I hear, which bothers me a lot, is when you hit 4 weeks. That's starting to go pretty long to get that feedback loop. But you're really going through, you have the backlog, the product owners prioritizing, and we're trying to go through and get that feedback. So this is a practice that you can use when you're trying to be agile to improve and do the best thing to meet your customers' needs. Now, of course, back before Scrum, even around the same time Scrum was evolving, Kent Beck and some other people, especially back in the 90s, were doing extreme programming, pair programming. I did a lot of this back in the 90s with teams I was working on at that time, and still do it today. But that really was kind of, we were going to, once again, do these shorter sprints, do a lot of testing, have the customer really kind of prioritize, but we had the right to kind of tell the customer how long it took things and based upon that feedback, we would get the acceptance test and go through that. And in fact, TDD evolved from extreme programming. A lot of people don't realize that, but TDD actually came out of that was, and a lot of times, most people think of TDD as like test first development, because that really, if you're like with Uncle Bob Martin or whatever, write your test first, or you're not doing TDD by the book. And there's some variations where people get success out of it, but it's really focusing on writing a test, getting your acceptance criteria, writing tests. I've shown more of a pragmatic approach there that, but you have a lot of tests as you go. And there's even other practices that have become popular, a little bit popular recently, like mob programming. You can join the mob. And I actually went out and joined the mob for a day with Woody Zoll. He's been giving a lot of talks, and they even have a conference on mob programming. But that's like XP up to the team, but you constantly keep going, rotating in, and do strong pairing. Strong pairing is if I'm on the keyboard, I can't be thinking of the ideas. Other people are telling me what to do. And if I have an idea, I have to give up the keyboard and step back. And so that way more of the knowledge keeps going. And I can step away from the mob for a while because I have to go research something or talk to the boss, or I just need a break. But the team keeps going. And I went out and joined the mob. He was in San Diego, and I said, Woody, this stuff sounds great, but I want to really experience it. How do I really know how good it is? So he worked it out where I went and joined the mob for a day. And I was adding value right away. In fact, they're so successful in their company doing this type of stuff that the organization took notice, and now they have like 7 mob teams. And they have a lot on the internet about it. You can go to mobprogramming.org, but they were really focused on trying to add value, and their defects went way down, and they're into continuous delivery, daily delivery, and constantly focusing on business needs, but very small things. But these are just practices. And even Woody will talk about, when he wrote a paper a few years ago for the Agile Experience Reports at the main Agile conference, he wasn't trying to sell mob programming. He was selling, do what adds the value, what works best for the team. They accidentally ran across this through trying to deliver and learn what worked best. And so they were experimenting and learning, and that's how they got there. So there's a lot of Agile myths. In fact, I've had, with some colleagues, we've had fun putting this online, that, simple solutions always work well. Well, sometimes our problems are hard. And so the simplest solution isn't always going to work. Or the simple solution might kind of work for the beginning part, but as you evolve, you see this is more complicated, and there might be a more elegant solution, well-known solution that we can apply here. And hey, we can always go fast. We're being agile, let's just keep it going. But you can't sustain it. Or wait, if we're practicing TDD, a lot of tests or Scrum and daily stand-ups and getting that feedback, we're going to create a great architecture. The architecture will magically emerge. We'll be able to easily add security and reliability and all these other issues later on, and it won't tear up the architecture and cause problems. And so these are a lot of myths. It's still okay to think about architecture and clean design as we go, and still be agile. And in fact, what's key for agile is continuous improvement. And this is something that most people really miss. A practice doesn't make you agile. I know a lot of banks too big to fail in the U.S. that wanted to become agile, so they went and, like one bank, went and had 100 certified Scrum Mastering training, right? And so what's the difference between a project manager and a Scrum Master? A weekend course and about $1,500, right? Anybody can do it, and it's very easy to become a certified Scrum Master. Don't tell anybody, but I did it once. So, But it's got good things, at least get you thinking about that, but that didn't make them agile. So it really meant that now they could kind of micromanage, and so this bank too big to fail didn't magically become agile just because they did that. What's key is, are we continuing to learn? If you're doing Scrum a year from now, the same way that you're doing it today, I claim you're doing Scrum wrong because you didn't learn. We should constantly be trying to learn and try little experiments. That's what the continuous improvement. And retrospectives are key for that. But you notice I have the Vegas kind of symbol there. What happens in the retrospective stays in the retrospective. And there's a two-edged sword on that. So one side of that is really focused on the fact that when you're doing retrospectives, you have to feel safe. There's not finger pointing. We're not blaming anybody. In fact, the best retrospectives, we're looking at ourselves. The team is trying to learn and see if there's some things they can do differently. Now, the other side of this, what stays in retrospective, what happens in retrospective, stays in retrospective, is if you don't take action afterwards. So a lot of times I see people, oh yeah, we're doing retrospectives. I was at one organization, they have 40-some Scrum teams. They're having huge success. They're growing at 100% a year in a down Brazilian economy. That's just great. I mean, that's a good business problem to have. But now their architecture, they're really getting a ball of mud. And that's why they kind of called me in. How could they evolve this and keep meeting up with their great business growth? Well, and so I went in, I did an assessment. I'm talking to a lot of the business people, the developers, the technical teams. And it's like, are you doing retrospectives? Oh yeah, we have them. Well, what happens afterwards? Well, it's a lot of stuff we're powerless over, or, we're blaming the database people, or we're blaming the DevOps, and it's like if you don't take a lot of little small steps of action, then that's what's key about retrospectives. Can we learn? And that's part of that inspect and adapt, that continuous improvement. So if we're really looking at continuous improvement and we value that, that's going to really drive our practice. So if our values drive practices, if you value clean code, well, there's a good technique we can use, refactoring. Clean code doesn't happen. You have to really craft it, maintain it. The team has to be committed. So if the team is not committed, if the team mindset is just to add a new parameter with a new case statement and just grow the method, that can cause a lot of problems. I like this quote by Martin Fowler: any fool can write a code that computer can understand, but that's not why we're using good languages and other stuff. I'm trying to write it so even I understand it next week, let alone my colleagues if I have to go somewhere and maintain it. And so that's an important feature of having this clean code. You have to craft it, you have to work on it. And in fact, they found this out in the 19th century, that this happened mostly here in Europe, where they found out that, man, a lot of patients, about 18% of patients were dying, serious patients, because they didn't have time to wash their hands between the next patient. Or they felt like, we don't have time, we have to just keep going. And they had this, some physicians started noticing something and doing some experiments. They tried little things like washing their hands and all the blood and stuff with some chlorine type solution to clean things up between patients, and the mortality rate went from over 18% down to about 1.5%. So just a little thing like taking a little bit of time cleaning up as you're going makes a big difference. And that's the same way with our software systems. I have a professional responsibility. How I deal with things, that little bit goes a long ways. It's my responsibility to focus on the professional. I'm a software developer, right? If I'm in there doing it, or I'm part of the team, I need to support this. Is it tested? Is it clean? There's little things I can do. And I call it like the Boy Scout model, because in the U.S. we have Boy Scouts, and the Boy Scouts are taught that if you go camping out somewhere, you pick up your mess before you don't leave a mess there after you finish. You clean up the campsite very good. And in fact, if you see a little bit of other mess, you make it your responsibility to make that campsite even better for the next person. So usually when you're picking up your mess, it takes hardly any extra effort, especially with the good refactoring tools, to do that. And also if there's legacy, I don't have to keep adding to the legacy. Yeah, maybe there's a mess here, but I can do some sprout methods, sprout classes, techniques like Michael Feathers talks about for extending. And my main commitment is never to make it worse than it was. And I try to make it better. I'm not guaranteed, but if I don't make it worse, at least it's not growing the mess. So really, if we're going to do this, we have to understand, if we're going to refactor, we have to understand what are bad code smells. And in fact, when you look at the book, refactoring book by Martin Fowler, Kent Beck and Ward Cunningham had a chapter, an essay on code smells, and they had like more than 24 or so. I put together my top 10 list. You can make great gains if you just get your team to really start thinking about these top 10. Good naming. Good format, good layout. There's been research proven that you can remove more bugs by just good formatting and a standard formatting. It makes the code more readable. Get rid of dead code or commented code. Trust the version control system. How many times do I see these? Even in the Java library, I should have put an example up there in the Java library. I have one where their map stuff, where their map attributes, they have this commented out code. It's like, get rid of it. It said, this used to be used a long time ago, and the comment says something like that. Throw it away. So if I come in and have to maintain that code, I have to read all that to try to understand it. I need to trust that if I needed to recreate it, I could either, one, recreate it better, or two, go back to the version control system and do that. Long methods, large classes. And being a computer scientist, I didn't know whether to start out with 0 or 1, so I had to add like an extra one. I was actually teaching a bunch of Java developers a few weeks ago down in Brazil and getting that mindset and trying to help the whole team start spreading it all around their organization. This one where they had 45 Scrum teams, 29 Scrum teams are committed to the core system. There's a couple million lines of Java code evolving that's key to their business. It's growing a lot. The other 16 teams are doing microservices, and they're not adding to the mess, so that's working well. But how do they do this? And so one of the things they added was magic numbers. They had that, so you can add whatever you want for 0 there. But these are really my top 10 that kind of came up that you can, these are some things that you can do to make big gains. In fact, there's a lot of safe refactorings where you will never go wrong when you're dealing with this. For example, you can always do rename. Rename never breaks anything. But it amazes me how many times people are afraid to rename. Now, I guess I should say, unless you're doing some reflective stuff with some external services and things like that, but then you can do a forwarding and kind of log where those calls are at and still keep it safe. But here's another one. If you have a long method, extract method never breaks anything. But how many people are afraid to do it? I have new team members are coming in, and so, oh, wait, you added this big method. Can I really change it? Yes, extract out. You're changing this piece in here that you've commented, just extract it into its own method. Now you can potentially make it more testable, and give it a nicer thing. Even create some common components for some shared code. This is a big refactoring that Kent Beck does every time. If he goes in and sees like a 8,000 line method, which sometimes we've seen, the worst I've seen is a single C++ class for close to 1 million lines of code. That's scary. And that was at PayPal, but it was so core to the company, but they were being successful with it. But a lot of times the new guy was afraid to touch anything because you can't break it. The boss says add, and you want to add and add value to the company, but you have to be able to feel safe about that. So what Kent Beck will do with a long method, he creates a method object. He'll create an object to put that method forward over to it, passing in all the values you need. You don't break anything doing that. You run it, make sure everything's still okay. Then you can start doing extract method and starting to understand it. And then you start seeing maybe there was even new objects that needed to come out. So there's lots of things you can do in there. And in fact, there's two types of refactoring type. Emerson Murphy Hill and Andrew Black did a case study out in industry. And we all know that even if we're doing a lot of flossing, we may occasionally need a root canal, but it's a lot less likely to happen if we're doing regular flossing. And I know I prefer the regular flossing than having a lot of root canals. But sometimes your business grows that even with regular flossing, you're going to have to, all of a sudden you have a new requirement where you have to do a little bit of root canal stuff. But we don't have time. How can we make time? How can we do this? The boss won't give us time to do refactoring. The customer, what value does it add? How can we do that? So I would like to switch to where we're thinking about how do we get time? We're not given time, but we really have to think about time. And for example, Kaizen is a principle that a lot of people are starting to talk about in the Agile lean mindset. And in fact, if you look at the dictionary definition of Kaizen, it doesn't really mean continuous improvement, though in the Western definition, we've kind of adapted it to that. But it's really any kind of improvement. It was really focusing on improvement, whether it's large or small. Usually we think of small improvements. But so it's kind of evolved. So a lot of times it's mostly viewed as continuous improvement. And in fact, Toyota with the TPS system, which influenced a lot of the Agilists and the lean thinkers, they were really committed to this continuous improvement type things and getting the feedback. And anybody could stop the line and take time to adjust to make things better. So that was really a big principle, especially in manufacturing. And some Agilists have tried to focus on continuous whatever, integration, delivery, improvement. That's what the retrospectives were about. But there's an important principle for Kaizen that a lot of us miss, and that's slack time. Nobody wants to give us slack time. Well, slack time means breathing room. If I'm always putting fires out, how can we make things better? Maybe we find a much better process that can make us do the same amount with half as much time. But if we don't have time to experiment and even figure out what are we wasting time with, and so you really need to monitor things and find, you need to start off and find out, are there some wasteful, repetitive things we're doing? Or the process we're doing, is it working well? And if you don't have this slack time, the organization has to inject it. You almost have to find ways to inject slack time to force it. Take that extra time. There's some little things you can do. Retrospectives were supposed to be part of that. Maybe you do some daily cleanup. Here's the problem a lot of times people have when they get slack time. Maybe let's bring in some outside people. Let's look at our process. Let's measure. Let's figure out what's going on. What's the team doing? Wow, there's some waste here. Maybe if we stop doing this, the team can, do the same amount with 20% less time. So in the sprint, we do that. And so now all of a sudden we have 20% less time. The issue is how do you use that time? Most organizations, they have I have my Gantt chart up there. We have our backlog, just shift left. Just add more features to this sprint because we save time. But then you still have the same problem. We never really got to use that time to lower our defects, make the quality higher. What's really the main principle of doing these types of practices shouldn't be just to go faster. That should be the side effect. It should really be, can we do the same with less, reduce waste, and then we can improve that. And we can use that 20% or whatever we end up with to look at and do experiments. And sometimes we might find an order of magnitude better way of doing things. But we're not going to find that if we don't have time to think because we're always putting fires out, constantly reactionary. So it's good to try little experiments, do different things with that. In fact, Spotify, this is a big part of Spotify process. I went out to Spotify at least a couple years ago with some of their white papers. They were talking about this a lot. And I visited them a couple years ago, when they have all their squads and tribes and different things going on. And it's a pretty cool environment. It's fun to go in there and check it out. But one thing they really focus on is this, for innovation, is think it, build it, ship it, and tweak it. But they're really caught up to constantly evaluating and improving, especially in the tweak it stage. But the tweaking it, you can only go so far as well, because even as you're tweaking things, you might find some ways to really micro-optimize it, but then you might have to step back and rethink it. So they allow for this time. They inject that time as part of the teams and do a lot of small, quick releases. And they make things very visible. As soon as I went into Spotify, all of the teams had visible to them, everybody using their system around the world, the feedback, the Twitter feeds, all the other stuff. You could see if somebody was complaining a lot or other issues. And it helped the team kind of be aware of things that were going on. So there's a lot of regular practices we can put in to make things better. You need to allocate time. So one of the teams I was working with down in Brazil, they did this every morning, which I thought was great. I got to write it up in a blog a lot better, but this just happened to me a few weeks ago when I was down consulting in Brazil. But one of the teams said, every morning, we've run our sonar reports from the night before, we've got all our feedback, and we start off the first 30 minutes or to an hour doing some cleanup, addressing some small things of the stuff we were working on. And they said the reason is it helps them. They're trying to figure out and get focused for the day anyway. They're still waiting for all the other team members to come to do their stand-up or whatever they're doing, or whatever practices that they're doing from that. And they know they can't do this at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, you're under the gun. You're getting calls, interruptions. You got to get it out before you go home. You want to go home. So you can't do this type of stuff at the end of the day, but at the beginning of the day, it gets their mind right. And then it affects them for the whole day, and they do that little bit of cleanup. Imagine if all 29 of those teams were doing this, what effect that would have on the code base. And I almost relate it to somebody doing their morning meditation, starting off, cleansing the mind, focusing. Or if I'm going to, runners, friends of mine that run, they always do morning stretches. They do, certain exercises to prepare them. Then they can sustain their run longer and not have problems. And this is similar, this will help us be even more, they're more successful through the day doing some of these little regular practices. But delivery size is key. So a lot of times we get caught up, we have to deliver a ton more. So if we're really going to be able to have time, and we're delivering too much, there's more potential defects. And then we're having to deal with emergency putting out fires and hacking in solutions to keep it working for the customer, which adds to the technical debt. It's harder to experiment, and we're not getting our feedback time. So it's really a focus. It can really cause, if it gets too big, it can start mudding up our software, and it's hard to inspect and adapt. So we need these fast feedback loops, just like the opening talk discussed yesterday, is getting these fast feedback loops. So how can we work this into our rhythms? And that's part of what I want to leave you with, is some different techniques that we can think about that we can do. I talked about the one, doing some refactoring practices, but you need time. Well, maybe you have to inject that time, find a way. I mean, Google used to have this, when they were a cool place to work for back in the day, when kind of like the Starfleet Academy or whatever, they used to be 1 day a week. As a developer, you can do whatever you want. You'd be amazed how many cool products came out of Google and helped Google from doing that. That gave them the slack time. That was injecting that slack time. You could figure out, did you want to clean up? Did you want to experiment with some new technology? But sometimes you have to put that in, and we have to build that into our rhythms. We have to build the quality doesn't just happen. We have to practice it, and we have to work at it. So, for example, we might want to qualify our backlog. Add backlog items for technical debt and quality-related architectural work. Hey, maybe we can eliminate all technical debt. No, I doubt that, but perfection is the enemy of good enough. A little bit of debt sometimes okay, and just like a chef, as a chef's cooking, he's dirtying some dishes. Same way in software, when we're in there, we're dirtying up the code a little bit as we're making changes, but a good chef knows his kitchen can't get too bad or he can't cook anymore. He has to constantly be cleaning as he's going. We need to have kind of that professionalism as well ourselves. Also, Philip Crutchin talks about you can, on your backlog or your Kanban board, you can really make your architectural work visible and explicit. We can colorize our backlog. For example, you can use green for your visible features, or whatever color you like. This is some colors he talks about. If it's a defect, we can make it red. Red is a common color used in most cultures for using as warning, whatever type things. But we can also flag technical debt. It's not stopping production, but let's notice what's going on. Let's make it visible. That's very, very important as we go. And in fact, we can even fit it into our processes. We can start putting some of our technical debt, and those can be prioritized in these different quality items as we go in. And ultimately, we may even have to have some different testing or ways of monitoring that as we go through. So even in Scrum, you can make it part of your process. And clearly, TDD makes this part of their process. Refactoring is a big part in keeping things clean as you go, or else it's hard to succeed at TDD. That's where people have problems because they forget this. They forget the refactor part. They get green, red, or no, well, I started wrong. Let me back up. Red, green. You always start off with a failing test, right? So Uncle Bob would say, no, Joe, fail. It has to be a failing test. Then make it green. But people can get caught up just going red, green, red, green, red, green. But then forget about, now it's hard to add this feature because the code has become too messy. But it was red, green, refactor. And because with the tools, especially with Java, there's a lot of, whether you're using IntelliJ, Eclipse, or whatever, there's a lot of great tools that extract method, Control-Alt-M, whatever. There it is. A couple seconds later, it runs, test pass, rename. Those types of refactorings are so safe and easy, I should just do them. Also, you might want to define certain triggers. Are there certain code quality metrics or other things that can cause problems? And look at that. And trigger that, now the team should become aware of this because we're starting to have the defects, the debt is getting a little high. We can have a little bit of debt, just like when you're buying a house, you need some debt sometimes to pay for it, but you don't want bad debt. Bad debt causes a lot of problems. And if the debt grows uncontrollably, it can have some long-term effects. So there are some ongoing quality activities that we can do. For example, to me, the first thing that's the most important thing for any organization to look at if they're really trying to get better is you have to know what's going on. If we don't look at and measure, it's okay to measure ourselves, Most teams or software developers, and I'm as guilty as this as anybody, ooh, don't measure me. How are you going to use that number? So there's a lot of fear around that. Ooh, you're going to use it to grade me or affect my raise or whatever. But really, we have to look at ourselves, and we have to look at the team and what's going on with the software as well. And we heard a lot of this being talked about yesterday. We may have to create dashboards or make them visible to the team. Show technical debt reduction or raise. Make the whole team aware of it. Then that changes the mindset, what's going on. And in fact, there's some techniques you can do that me and a couple of my colleagues have talked about, like continuous inspection. We heard a lot of these yesterday by Michael Cordes when he gave his talk about the fast feedback loops, and there's a lot of different tools you can use, whether it's Sonar Cube or your check style or Jenkins. You can find bugs. Write your own. In fact, this one, the person up there on your left is Paulo Merson. He was working at the basic equivalent of the federal bank, the Federal Reserve in Brazil. They were using a lot of this, and they would write a lot of their own plugins, which Michael talked about as well, for doing certain checks of quality, or even architectural conformance. If you're worried about certain security or SQL injection attacks, and we want people to use a certain framework, we want new team members to be aware of it, or if there's problems, you can add that. And automate where you can. And then we have a pattern I like to talk about, automate first, which really means automate anything that's difficult as soon as you can to get rid of that difficulty if it's a repeated task. If you do it once, you don't worry about it. But if you're having to repeat this regularly and it costs a lot and you can automate it, it can help, like with your tests. And you should periodically reevaluate what are your risks, even during your planning. And we can do some continuous, use that feedback loop to get it back as we're going through our implementation, as we're delivering, but let that affect our iteration planning. So it's important to have pause points. And unfortunately, most Agile people, when they're blindly following, they're doing some kind of blindly, this single thing makes me Agile, is they don't have those, or the pause points, they think they have them because they say, oh, we have the end of a sprint. We have a retrospective. But they're not really using those pause points. And there's a lot of things you can do. For example, you might even have checklists. A release checklist. This is based upon James Thorpe from an insurance company here I think it's a German company he's involved with here in Europe. But he shared his checklist here, and this really talked about code quality checklists. He had different architectural checklists. They had other quality type checklists. And this was part of their pause points. And I don't know why we're so against checklists, or a lot of people I know in the software industry, developers, we seem to kind of be resistant. Like, we know what we're doing. We don't need this check. But what's a backlog? Isn't a backlog a checklist? It's an item. We got it on the list. We're prioritizing it, and we check it off when we move it over. And in fact, airplane pilots, doctors use this. I'm glad that doctors are using this, or airplane pilots, to make sure everything's right. But there's really two types: read, review, and do, confirm. So based upon that, checklist can provide a lot of value. And in fact, here's kind of a checklist. This is from some friends of ours in Romania that are doing some stuff from Mosaic Works, but they had a checklist for even going through their Kanban board. They even had a checklist for their daily stand-up meetings. And they're doing kind of daily delivery, continuous delivery stuff. So where do you start? Well, mostly you need the size matters. And small can be good because we get that feedback more often, and we have to monitor. And there's a lot of small steps we can take to be successful. Pick some low-hanging fruit. Colorize your backlog. Experiment around. Create quality related checklists. Put some of these things in. But the team has to own it. If the team is going to abide by and use checklists more frequently and add value, if they create it and adapt it. And they have to be alive, and we have to continually be learning and inspecting and adapting. And get that mindset through the whole team. And a lot depends upon where your pain is and how much risk you have. So if you have a lot of risk, it can affect you. If you're a small project, usually architecture can evolve okay if you just have a small, lightweight team. But if you're on a larger project, there's a lot more risk that you have to deal with. And so you may have to do a lot more to make things visible as you go. So architecture needs to be explicit. So values drive your practice. So let me give you a call to action, kind of leave this with you. Small, frequent releases. Keep your code clean as we go. And make things more visible. And use that feedback. Create some time. Inject it as you go through. And get into some daily, regular, routine practices as you go through things. And ultimately, you can sustain your development. So, you know, there was the Agile manifesto, and, you know, they had this nice Agile manifesto for software development. But, you know, just like I've heard of some people like talking about modern Agile, creating their own manifesto. Well, I've been working with a friend of mine recently here, and we've been talking about lazy manifesto. And in a sense, most good developers are lazy, right? They try to create an easier way to do things. And that's really what this slack time or Kaizen is. So let's keeping slack over utilizing time. Small, high-quality software over large, complex. Doing only what is necessary to exhaustively discover, and doing less to deliver the same. Wow, that sounds like a Kaizen principle. And hey, we want our principles as well. Doing nothing is always an option. And we're not afraid of eliminating our own task or my own job even. We expand things. We only work hard to make our work easier and safer. So, you know, that's some of this. If really being agile is focused on learning and trying to adapt, maybe we should think about rethinking some of the manifesto and some of the different principles. So we got our lazy one is fun. So it's a journey. It takes a lot of commitment, a lot of deliberate practices, small, fast delivery. So there's being versus doing agile. A lot of people get caught up with blindly doing. There's one truth, and if I don't do stand-ups this way and Scrum exactly like this, I'm not being agile. That's very rigid. That's strict. That's dogmatic, almost a religious way. Being agile there could be multiple things. Constantly learn, like the shu-ha-ri. So early on, I learned it by the book, but then I do the ha. I'm trying to expand it, and then we can try to move beyond it even. So here's your kind of core ideas of takeaway. Values drive your practice. Continuous improvement should be a big part of that. And how can we take a lot of small steps? And code quality and delivery size are key to this. And there's many of the practices I've talked about to help. I give you some additional resources. And it's my pleasure once again to come down and be part of the JDD. I always really enjoy this a lot. So Jinkui, thank you very much. And look forward to questions if there's time.